impact on the
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and I respectfully request written responses as you offered to the questions that you were not able to answer because I asked so many, including the deposition of the Libyan officials, which is so timely. My good friend, the ranking member, Mr. Berman.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and I do want to commend to my colleagues on the committee the speech that Secretary Clinton gave, in addition to her excellent testimony today, but yesterday going to the Human Rights Council, where she discussed Libya, Iran, and other issues. It's really quite a remarkable presentation, particularly in pointing out the hypocrisy of Iran's condemnations of violence in Libya and what they do to their own people and protesters in Iran. I'd like to try to get into two issues in this short time. One, the Israeli-Palestinian process. And I guess the question, and I ask this because I struggle in my own mind with the right approach at this particular point. Has the emergence of protest movements throughout the Arab world altered the dynamics of the Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking? Given Egypt's preoccupation with its internal issues, I assume Egypt in the immediate future is not going to be very involved in Israeli-Palestinian diplomacy. How important is the removal of Egypt from the peace process equation? Is this a time when we should be pushing forward with peace efforts, or should we wait for the regional dust to settle, sort of bad metaphor, I guess, here, before making another push? What do you anticipate from the next quartet meeting, which, as I understand, likely to take place this month? And I have one other question after that.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Berman. We believe that a continuing effort on behalf of the two-state solution is first and foremost in Israel's interests. In addition to that, in the interests of presenting a very affirmative effort in the midst of all of this turmoil and change. So our work continues, and we understand
Hillary Clinton there talking about continuing efforts for a two-state solution on the question of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process in answer to a question there from Congressman with the peace process. And earlier, in talking about Libya, she expressed the desire for the opposition to help the opposition, but in realizing that they also want to be seen to be doing the work themselves of getting that was under review next is a no-fly zone. She said it was under active consideration. Let's bring in Rosalind Jordan now. So, as we were just saying a moment ago, she did talk about the no-fly zone. Is that the strongest language you think on it being under active consideration?
That is rather strong language, Lauren, and that's because there hasn't been any specifics that the administration has wanted to reveal. And when it talks about having, quote, for a no-fly zone is starting to pick up some traction here on Capitol Hill, because there are many people who believe that at the very least it would prevent the Gaddafi regime from carrying out the unprompted attacks on civilians who are opposed to Colonel Gaddafi's continued place in power. However, there are legal questions, as the Secretary alluded to in her answer to the chairwoman of the panel, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and the Secretary also indicated that it would take on a large amount of planning and coordination. Now, in another committee hearing here on Capitol Hill, James Mattis, the Marine Corps general, who is also talking about budget issues, but this time on behalf of the Pentagon, indicated in a question from Senator John McCain that the no-fly zone option is being looked at, but he did say that it would be, and I'm paraphrasing here, a full-scale military operation, and it would also involve taking out any sort of airstrike capability on behalf of the Libyan Air Force. So this is being discussed quite actively here on Capitol Hill.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Rosalind Jordan, for the time being. Now let's get some more news from Europe and go back to Stephen Cole in London. Stephen.
Thanks, Lauren. Germany's Defence Minister Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg has stepped down following a prolonged scandal over his PhD thesis. Chancellor Angela Merkel said she accepted his resignation, quote, with a heavy heart. Guttenberg was stripped of his doctorate last month after a portion of it was found to be plagiarised. Paul Brennan reports.
The suave young Bavarian aristocrat was one of Germany's most popular government ministers and a darling of the country's conservative right. Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg had been tipped as a possible future leader, and he frequently topped opinion polls ahead of his boss Angela Merkel. But his carefully crafted reputation for honesty and integrity was undermined last month by the revelation that as much as 20% of his PhD thesis appeared to have been copied without attribution. Guttenberg has strongly denied deliberate plagiarism and at first tried to ride out the publicity storm. But with the scandal showing no sign of fading, Tuesday's resignation had become inevitable.
I have informed the Chancellor in a very friendly conversation that I am withdrawing from my political offices, and I have requested to be relieved of duty. This is the most painful step of my life. I'm not going only because of my erroneous doctoral thesis, although I understand that would be enough of a reason. The main reason is the question of whether I can still live up to the high requirements I set myself in carrying out my responsibilities.
Angela Merkel's initial support for her defence minister was a risky strategy, no doubt with an eye to securing conservative votes in 3 crucial state elections later this month. But headlines such as Baron Cut and Paste had made Guttenberg more of a hindrance than a help in recent days. And if the university decides Guttenberg plagiarised deliberately, then he could yet be accused of an even more serious offence, of lying to Parliament. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera.
And France's new foreign minister has now officially taken over. Alain Juppé replaced Michelle Elliott-Marie, who was forced to resign following a cabinet reshuffle at the weekend. She was criticised after revelations that she took holidays in Tunisia and because of her ties with the ousted leader, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. French fashion house Christian Dior has fired its creative director John Galliano after a video emerged of the designer praising Hitler and making anti-Semitic comments. Galliano appeared in a Paris police station on Monday for another incident in which he allegedly hurled racial slurs at a couple in a Paris cafe and slapped one of them. Galliano, who's been at Dior for 14 years, denies the accusations. And that's all the news from Europe, and me, Stephen Cole, in London. Time to rejoin Lauren in Doha.
Thanks, Stephen. Now, 2 American security guards accused of killing 2 Afghan civilians are back on trial in the United States. The men worked in Afghanistan for a division of the company formerly known as Blackwater. They were tried last year, but the jury couldn't reach a verdict. Tom Ackerman reports.
Christopher Drotleff and Justin Cannon were hired by Paravant, a shell business for the company formerly known as Blackwater. Their job helping to train Afghan soldiers. That was until May 2009, when an incident left 2 Afghans dead and the contractors fled the country. The 2 Americans say they fired their weapons in self-defense at the Afghans riding in a car which rammed their convoy and then tried to run them over. An Afghan pedestrian was also hit at close range and was among the dead. Prosecutors say the Afghans' car was never a threat, and a U.S. Army review found that the 2 Americans had been drinking that night and violated weapons policies. The incident was not the first involving questionable weapons use by